Why you gotta hate, man? Capture sound.
Hey!
Got a big fat 6 viewers there. What's happening, guys?
6 viewers in 30 seconds. They've been waiting probably for 15 minutes because we said we were going to go on at, I don't know, 5:30-ish. But that's all right. We're always late anyway.
5:30-ish, sir. It's 5:37.
Yeah.
Guys, you can at first we were going to blame Colin, who's right down there. That's Colin.
There's Colin.
We were going to blame Colin, but honestly, it was my fault. I was jacking around with new equipment that I wanted to play with and figure out different scenarios to use it, and didn't work out so well. Nobody could hear me.
Typical kayakers jacking around with new gear, don't know how to use it.
That's right, man.
Pretty much. Well, this is a new episode format, guys. We're actually gonna, this will be a audio version on Spotify and Apple and iHeartRadio and everything. It's just gonna be kind of a quick hitter type version. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna have guys come on. We're calling it Straight Trippin. We're gonna have guys come on and just kind of talk about their last trip and what they were using, where they fished, how they fished, how the fish reacted. And Colin and Chris, you guys were in Grand Isle for this trip. Is that correct?
That's where we were at, man. Grand Isle, Louisiana. This was Colin's first time fishing Louisiana. So
first time across the border, yep. Well, first time across the border fishing. I've been to New Orleans and what have you, but it was my first time casting a line, and it was a pretty successful trip. I was satisfied, very impressed.
And I think that's why Drew wanted to bring Colin on, is kind of speak about it. Hey, don't be jealous, Josh.
Josh said way too much hair in this episode, so you guys that are listening to this on Spotify, you're going to have to check out the Paddler's Playbook YouTube channel to see what we're talking about. We have, Colin, what's the lead singer of Motorhead's name?
Oh, come on, brother. You should know this.
I really...
Killmeister.
Okay.
Isn't that Sebastian Bach?
Get out.
So we got Fishing Jesus and then Motorhead over here that's on the show today. But so we're talking about new Pantene Pro V commercial. That's pretty much it.
I'm a L'Oreal kind of guy, just throwing that out there.
Revlon. So were there any other bro staff guys along with this trip? How many guys were out on this trip with you guys?
There were, Colin had never met these guys. Actually, a couple of them I had never met. The Scots. The Scots is as they were called. There were two guys named Scott. And I had never met those guys. They are from Ozello, which is along the nature coast in Florida. Those of you guys who have listened to the Florida-Texas connection, we talked about the people that we know along those different coastlines in Florida, and the Scots were from the nature coast. And we met up with Harry Smith from Harry Smith Outdoors. Actually, Harry called me up a couple weeks before and said, "Hey, man, I'm going to be in Louisiana. You want to meet up?" And I've always told him anytime that he travels along the Gulf Coast, if he wants to give me a shout, I'm down to meet up with him. But I don't like traveling alone. I will do it if it's 3 or 4 hours, but 6-hour trip is sort of stretching it for traveling alone. So I like to hit up my buddies and see who can make a quick trip. COVID has put, of course, the damper on a lot of guys that wanting to get out and go and travel. But Colin was like, "Hey, man, I'm going to put on my face panties and we're going to do it." So I picked him up from his place Sunday morning, and I let all these people know. I invited like, I don't know, 12 guys and said, okay, who can make it? Who can do this trip with me? I just need like one or two at least. And Colin was the only dude that was like, hey man, I can definitely make it. I'm taking 2 weeks off from work. I'm driving in from Dallas Saturday night. I'll be home like around midnight. You can pick me up the next morning. So that's exactly what I did. I picked him up Sunday morning. I told them all it was going to be fast and furious, man. We're heading straight out to Louisiana. We're going to fish for a full day on Monday and then head back.
Now, Colin, what type of fish were you guys targeting on this trip?
I would have been happy with the gaff top. I was just targeting fish, but typically redfish. There was some talk of trout. I'm a big flounder, nerd. So I was hoping for some flounder, and I didn't know where they would be in their migratory pattern in Louisiana relative to how they work here in Texas. But anyway, we were targeting mainly redfish, and redfish is what we caught.
So, Colin, you did a little bit of research heading out to Grand Isle. And guys, those of you that are listening, and I wish more people were actually on this live episode, because I'd love to get into some of how you plan your trip to an area that you've never been to before. And Colin, that's exactly what you did. Was you were like, man, I got to kind of have an idea of what's going on here. And I know that on the way there, you said, I don't know what to expect. So I looked up a few things, and it doesn't look like Louisiana has flounder.
Well, no, it was interesting the way they were laying out the species that you can catch out of Grand Isle, whether it's offshore or inshore. And flounder wasn't even mentioned. That was, they go fish species by fish species. And I just thought it was interesting that flounder had no mention whatsoever.
Flounder had no mention, Drew. So in Grand Isle, in Louisiana, which is known as it's honestly known as one of the redfish meccas of the Gulf, you have zero mention of flounder. And I told Colin, I said, hey, don't be surprised if some of these areas, if they have a hard rain, you'll catch some bass that far south. They'll move all the way down far south, because there is, we literally drove next to water bayou called Bayou Black almost until we got to Grand Isle. And that bayou feeds into that area. It's just north of Grand Isle and Hope. And so if they have a good hard rain, man, you'll get some bass in those marshes. And he was like, what? And some bass? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Some bass.
Did you guys catch any bass while you were there that day?
It was redfish overload.
Redfish over. Now, the area that you guys were fishing, I know a lot of places in Louisiana like that, it's just where the marsh and the ocean just kind of meet. There's no barrier islands like there are in Texas and some in Florida. Is that how it is in Grand Isle, where there's not a whole lot of barrier islands, and you could see 5-foot bull sharks swimming in right beside you and things like that?
So where were we at again?
Well, Grand Isle.
Grand
Isle, right? So that's 2 words. That's 2 words.
Grand and Isle. Grand Isle.
Would it lead you to believe that it's an island?
Yes, leads me to believe there are islands. There are islands. Yes.
Go ahead, Colin. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I was just going to say I noticed a lot of similarities with the area we were fishing as with Texas. It was a barrier island. You've got the surf and the open Gulf on one side, and then on the back side you've got all the beach houses and piers and pier houses facing into the backside bay, very much like West or East Galveston Bay.
So what Drew, what you were talking about is like much of the marsh looks like if you look at a map of Louisiana, yeah, it looks like just a bunch of deltas.
Yes,
right?
That's what I was meaning.
Yeah, it just looks like a bunch of areas where rivers are dumping out into the Gulf. That's what it's like. Much of the Louisiana marshlands and fisheries, it's like that. But Grand Isle is a little bit different because it is a barrier island. and they've got it's a very powerful area too in the way uh, set up for imports and exports and a lot of local business set up right there. And it was crazy coming in. We came in at night and I was pointing out to Colin, look, man, that's where we're headed. And it's just like this sea of bright lights, right? It was crazy, man. It's like it lit up. You could see it from, I think we were about 20 miles away, 20 to 30 miles away. And you could still see this, just lit up land. And that was just Chevron, a Chevron plant, and that's Port Fourchon. And that area, like I said, it's set up for all the oil companies. And you read a little bit about it. You were telling me, Colin, what you had found out about the oil companies coming in and out.
Yeah, basically 90% of the waterways trade that takes place happens right there where we were fishing.
So there you go. So all those trade areas where they have to have industry set up. They have to have some sort of factory or holding areas or buildings or whatever. They have to protect that. So they do have a lot of man-made drains. And in fact, if you look at Grand Isle, the Port Fourchon flats, some people call it the flats, some people call it the marsh. But you look at it, it doesn't look right. It looks like it's man-made. Like how do you create? How does nature create all of that? Well, nature didn't create all that. That's all man-made areas there to protect industry that's behind it.
All right. So, Colin, how did you guys, what was your main means of targeting these redfish that you guys were after? Were you guys throwing popping corks? Were you guys throwing soft plastics? Was this a mixture of everything? What worked for you on this trip? What did you catch your fish with?
I caught my fish with what I catch pretty much most of my saltwater fish with, and that's 3 or 4 inch DOA paddle tail. And my favorite colors are Texas roach, so that's the black with the gold glitter mixed in, and then like a lighter kind of purple, somewhat translucent. And I went with the black and gold. I just that's my tried and true lure tactic, and it's worked in clear waters. It's worked in completely stained and dirty waters. And when we first got in the water, I was just kind of blown away with how clear the water was. And I felt kind of like I was going against reasoning, throwing something dark. I should have been throwing something light, but fish didn't seem to mind. So the very first fish I hooked into was a 29-inch red, and it's sitting on ice in my fridge right now. It's getting cooked tomorrow. And right after that, I caught a 20-inch red, same lure, and then I managed to get 3 sheep's head, which were actually of legal size. Apparently, it's 10 inches for sheep's head in Louisiana, but I don't catch sheep's head on plastics often. I would say this is probably the most I've ever caught on plastics. I got 3 sheep's head. They were all about 12 inches, but that was kind of my bag for the day, and that was my approach, was just using a 3 to 4 inch DOA paddle tail. I like the way those paddle tails swim. I like the way they work. You feel the vibration on those paddle tails a certain way I don't get out of, say, Cocoa Minnow saltwater assassins, which I'd still catch fish on those, and I've used them. I like them, but something about those DOA paddle tails, they're just killer, man. I cannot recommend them enough. And I get like the big, 100 bags, at the fishing convention every year. Well, now, shoot, I did it one year. I'm still in the same bags.
You're still in the same bag? Yeah.
Now, were you using...
Yeah.
What kind of jig heads were you using? Just your standard jig head, or were you throwing weedless, or do you normally throw weedless?
I normally throw weedless just because of the abundance of oysters here in our Texas-based systems, but there really were no snags. I mean, other than, some twigs and branches and that kind of debris that kind of get in there from, the tidal movement and what have you. But there really were no reefs that I could see that were ever visible. There might have been in some of the deeper areas. I don't know, but it was very sandy or soft, slightly soft mud bottom. But I just use the belly weight because I'm just used to it, with the weight on the shank of the hook. And I believe it was an 1/8 ounce, and it works just right. We were fishing in water that deep for the most part. The fish weren't really exposed, but there really wasn't much room for them to not be exposed. So they must have just been cruising right along in the mud.
So here's what's crazy is that, I've been there before, and these guys had not. Harry, nor the Scots, nor Colin had been there before. And so what I explained to them as far as what we would encounter was deep water in these fingers. And I was like, make sure you have a popping cork rigged up because we can work popping corks along these grass edges. And we were greeted in the morning by an outrageous outgoing tide that pretty much pulled all the water straight out. And if you looked at some of the pictures that I had posted, we had to walk our kayaks probably 70, 80 yards through. It wasn't too deep of mud until you got to the edge. But there were a lot of places where there just was not any more than 4 or 5 inches of water. But the one thing that they did get that I was adamant, or what I explained to them, was that the water would be clear. The water was not going to be muddy unless they had a really bad storm come through, because that bottom is primarily sand. So, they have some mud, but it's a lot. There's a lot of sand on that bottom.
Now, Chris, Colin was talking about he was throwing swim baits and throwing weedless. I know you made a Facebook post the other day. Were you using the gulp paddle tails out there? I saw those in your post, and then you talked about what size of the Berkeley Fusion that you wanted to use with those. Can you talk just a little bit about that and kind of go over what you're talking about on your post for the guys that want to get those new paddle tails, because those things got some wicked action?
So first, let me say I was set up for every scenario possible. I had my popping cork ready with a shrimp underneath, a gulp shrimp. I had a gold spoon. I had my top water. I had a crankbait, and I had my paddle tail set up. By the time I found fish and the fish that I wanted to catch, it was just the paddle tail. Okay, everything else was put aside. And I went on a sight casting spree for about a mile stretch of this one part of the marsh. And I don't know how many fish I caught. There was not a tally that I was keeping, and I don't know how large they were, except for the ones that I did string up and brought home. But they were all caught on the 4-inch gulp paddle tail, the new paddle tail that just came out from Gulp this last year in 2020. And what I found out was that the 4-inch is a little too short for a 3/0 swim bait hook. Okay. And the problem was, and I don't have one here with me, but the problem is that the right in front of the anal fin, I would need to run that hook back through right before the anal fin, and it was very thin right there at the tail. So what ended up happening was, after about 5 or 6 fish, it would start to rip at that portion of the plastic. But you know what? Most people that use Gulp would probably say, hey, that's an amazing, change in Gulp, because usually 2 fish and your Gulp is chewed up, right? These things did not have any type of markings on them that would show that they had been, bounced off of, hard bottoms or torn up on oyster shells or fish teeth marks, because redfish do have teeth and they are going to leave teeth marks. They were perfect, man, except for where that swim bait hook came back through. So I know now that if I need to use a swim bait hook, I'm going to switch to a 5-inch. And if I can fish an area without a swim bait hook, then I can use those 4-inch paddle tails or even the 3-inch paddle tails with maybe a smaller 2-aught Fusion 19 jig head instead of the swim bait hook. So I'm sold on, dude. They are amazing as far as being a resilient plastic and be able to take the beating. And it's freaking gold, dude.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty sweet. I love the action on them. I got to use some in Matagorda a few weeks. I didn't get to test them out on many fish though, just a couple rat reds. But
were you using them on swim bait hooks or on jig heads?
I was using them on the smaller swim bait hooks, but I think I got the
crazy action.
I believe I bought the 5-inch though. I think I got all 5-inch because me and you talked and you had bought the 4-inch and you told me to either do the 5 or the 6 whenever I get the next batch. All right, Colin, how are you guys targeting these fish, or where did you find them? Were they on points? Were they right along the grass lines? Where did you find your fish in the marsh?
My specific fish came from off, I'd say about 5 yards from the grass line, in less than a foot of water. And I'm trying to think how better to describe it. Chris was, I have bad knees and I'm just awkward, with balance. And so I don't stand much in my kayak, which is a shame because I think that's where Chris was able to land more fish. I mean, I think his bait. I never got to try the gulp that he was using. I meant to, and I just forgot. We all got carried away and scattered. We were doing our own thing. But I think that was a huge advantage. And I mean, especially how clear that water was, how shallow it was. And just how abundant the fish were for a few hours there. I mean, it was mayhem all around us. There were redfish everywhere. It's just getting the bait in front of their face. And so Chris, being able to stand and see them, he was able to obviously see the profile of the fish and get it in front of their face. I was, doing more the Jedi approach, using the Force. I could just feel that, see that fish were in a spot. They were kind of giving themselves away. And you can just tell nervous water when it's bait or like a mullet, or when it's like mullet that are scared, or it's the fish creating that wake or that movement in the water. But I could just tell there were fish there. And I just casted this one point, boom, 29-inch fish. My first Louisiana fish. I don't know. We were arguing, is that a bull redfish or not? I meant to ask if it had kids, but I didn't. I forgot to ask before.
You forgot to ask if he had kids. so, guys, go ahead and post up on the Bro Staff page. What do you think qualifies a redfish for bull status? Okay, I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Me too.
Here's the deal, man. And I meant to preface a lot of our talk with this, and I hate that we've only got 6 people here to listen, and hopefully people go back and listen to this. There's no real right or wrong way to get out there and do any of this, okay? I hear people talk a lot about, you've got to do it this way, you've got to do it that way. You know what the wrong way of doing it is? Sitting on your ass at home and not getting out there on the water. That's the wrong way, all right? If you're out there at least trying something, you're doing it right. Okay, you've got to get out there and you've got to at least try a product. You've got to try a technique. You've got to try an area, and continue to build off of that. And everybody has new techniques that they develop as they become a more proficient fisherman. Okay, I started just like everybody else, saying that bait sucks. This bait is awesome, right? And Colin, you went on mute there. I don't know what happened. But it used to always be the paddle shad or the sea shad from
Saltwater
Bass Assassin.
Yeah. and pumpkin chartreuse. I was like, everything else sucks except for this little paddletail.
Because you
And
caught fish on that
I
for
caught fish
like
on that all
two
the time.
trips in a row, and then it's the best bait ever.
That's right. But here's what happens over time. Okay, you become a more proficient fisherman. And Colin was talking about, hey, Chris was able to stand in his kayak, and that may have made a big difference for him. Let me tell you, not only did standing make a huge difference for me, but the fact that I had the sun overhead, which made my shadow really low. Okay, I had a really low shadow that day, and the east wind at my back. Okay, and we had east winds in that area for like 4 days in a row. So that means to me that most everything's going to be pushed off to the west end of the marsh. Um, so with that east wind, slight east wind at my back, and the sun overhead, I was able to let that whole entire scenario just push me along. And I did not even worry too much about putting the bait in front of the fish, Colin. I was actually working on whether or not um, the lateral line in a fish is reactive or causes a reaction. So most of my fish that were caught, and the guy Scott, one of the Scots was sitting there watching me for a while, and he was like, he's telling the other Scott, he's like, I don't know what this guy's doing, but he's just tossing out there, and all of a sudden he's got a fish on. It was basically, I would see a fish in an area, and I didn't care if I put it in front of his face or if I put it to the side of him. I didn't even care if I put it behind him, as long as I could work the lure in such a way that would cause that fish to turn around to see what was going on. And most of my fish did not come off of putting the bait in front of their face. It actually came, they turned around to find the bait that I was working in the water. And that was freaking awesome because I watched it all day long, over and over and over again. And I pretty much proved what some of these fishermen were talking about, proved to myself anyway, right? I didn't prove to anyone else because, of course, I didn't have cameras. If I brought cameras with me, I would have freaking stumped.
You wouldn't have caught a damn thing. It would have been It would have been the GoPro curse, man. The GoPro curse. So when you said you were seeing them, were you seeing like outlines of the fish, or was the water clear enough where you were looking at the whole fish that was swimming by?
I stalked a fish for 80 yards.
Okay, so it was that clear.
Yeah.
Chris Lopez has a question for you guys here, or for Chris. Chris, what do you use to push pole when you're standing? I use a sup paddle, and I'm debating changing it. So are you just using your paddle, your stakeout stick? What are you using, man?
So I've got a 260 centimeter paddle, which is I think the longest Hobie makes and gives away with their kayaks. I've got a 250 and a 260, and I use the 260 most of the time. So that's all I've got. That's all I really need. Now, what sucks, Chris Lopez, is that Hobie kayaks have most kayaks, in fact, have a tendency of getting pushed around. Yeah. And mine that particular day was doing something really, really strange. Not only would it push my back end out, but once I got my back end pushed out to a certain direction, it would actually start pushing me into the shoreline. It was really freaking weird. So I did fight quite a bit throughout the day, but I just used the paddle, bro. That's it. I don't use, push pole's great if I can get my body offset to the kayak, and get that push pole directly behind me. But since I can't, I have to work off of either the right side or the left side of the boat. Paddle's the best way to go.
Well, cool. Do you think, Chris, that the gulp and the action of that gulp actually helped with the fish being able to sense with that lateral line? Do you think it was because that the action on the tail on those new gulp paddle shad is freaking crazy? Like, there is a ton of action on those things. Do you think that had anything to do with it, or you would have been able to pretty much throw anything by them and they were feeding?
So the action on the tail is definitely going to be a contributing factor. But I also think it had something to do with that belly weight, because I would drag it through a little patch of sand. I would just pull it straight through that sand, and that tail would flip. But also that belly weight scraping across the sand might have had something to do with it. But either way, I just knew that I was creating a disturbance and that fish would turn around. And man, if I had to guess, let's say I caught 20 redfish. 16 of them probably turned around on my bait.
Oh,
It was,
wow.
it was that crazy, just testing out that theory over and over and over again. And here's what's crazy, guys. A lot of these fish, yeah, I would see them, but then they would sense my pressure wave at some point. They would sense my pressure wave and they would, boom, take off, but then they'd stop. Remember that one day whenever we were in the skiff, um, Drew, and they would take off but then stop?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what they were doing a lot of times. We're taking off and then stop. Now, once I knew they weren't going to eat anymore was whenever they'd take off and then they'd never come back.
Now, Colin, we're fixing to end in the show here. These are meant to be kind of quicker episodes. How was it getting out there with members of the bro staff and fishing in Louisiana and getting out there with Chris on the water? Any lasting impressions that you want everybody to know about? Any funny stories? And then I have one more question about the ride home. I need to ask you about a picture that Chris posted on Facebook.
Oh dear, yeah, I think I know where that one's going. But no, I mean, I ain't gonna butter my bro's biscuit too much here, but I always enjoy fishing with Chris, and aside from the quality fishing, it was just a good trip. The people we met
It was
up with.
fast and furious, man. We didn't have much time to really. And to be honest, I told Drew this. I'm still recovering from Sunday night.
Oh yeah! Oh hell yeah! Oh hell yeah! I am too. I think we definitely knocked back a few too many the night before. Standard excitement before actually getting out on the water. I mean, I was driving into that whole area. It's just amazing. I mean, there's so much real estate out there. There's so much marsh. There's so much grass. There's so many features. You could spend a lifetime in that whole area and not fish every nook and cranny. I mean, there's so much real estate. I can't wait to get back. Just to kind of, I know we want to summarize and wrap things up, so I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the things that Chris said. What I found interesting was that a popping cork was never worked. We did try that. The popping cork was never effective. Maybe because of the depth of the water, that's what Chris thinks. I mean, I think you can get a popping cork to work in any situation, even with a small leader. But maybe Chris is right. I couldn't buy a bite on a popping cork. So that was interesting. Saw the best sunset. Probably one of the best sunsets I've ever seen out on the water. And I have been scratching my legs furiously for the last 3 days. It wasn't mosquitoes, gnats.
No seams.
No seams got you, huh?
Oh my God! I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night like freaking Tyrone from Dave Chappelle, just scratching. It's horrible. I'm scratching right now. It's driving me nuts. But that's my only complaint. I highly recommend that anybody listening or watching now or listening to this in the future, go out to the Grand Isle area. As you drive in, you see the real estate. The fish are there. And it's just getting out there and doing it exactly like Chris said, sitting on your butt, dreaming and thinking about it. That's doing it wrong. So, and I continue to amaze myself. I don't consider myself a great angler or a pro or a diva or anything like that at all. And I was a bit embarrassed. I first fished 29-inch red. The other guys from Florida were sick looking at me, and I'm like, guys, I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah. And I just wanted to say thanks again very much, guys, for having me on this. Y'all are doing a great job, and y'all are doing a great service to the kayak community, and y'all are my friends. Thank y'all.
We appreciate it, man. We appreciate it. All right, so my last question. Chris was posting some pictures up on Facebook, on the Bro Staff page. What was going through your mind as you were looking? I'm assuming it was boudin in your hand, as you had just taken that bite of boudin from the best stop. What was going through your mind? Because you were gazing into it so lovingly as you were sitting in the truck.
If you want to know the truth, I was like, how many animals are in this, and what parts of those animals are in this?
One animal.
One animal and all of the parts.
Yeah, and I was like, doesn't matter. It eats good. Yeah.
There you go, man. Well, we guys, we appreciate you tuning in to this live edition. As I said before, this is gonna be on YouTube. This will be on Facebook, and this will also be available on Spotify as our Straight Trippin' episode. As far as YouTube is concerned, we're halfway to giving away our first giveaway for, every 100 subscribers. We're going to give something away. We're halfway to our first one, guys. We need help getting those subscribers, so make sure that you guys share this, share the YouTube page, share the Facebook page. We really appreciate you guys listening. Here is to a great 2021. Chris, you got anything before we get off of here, man?
I was going to let Don Solomon know that worm rattles, I use them all the time, man. Worm
Just
rattles.
shove them in there, right?
I might set up a couple of plastics the night before with worm rattles, and I close the hole back up just by heating up the plastic with a lighter.
Nice.
So that because worm rattles have a tendency of working their way out.
All right, man. Well, guys, we have more live videos like this coming to you for 2021. We've got some big guests booked, and in the books, we've got some old favorites that we're going to bring in next year. We're excited for 2021, and we couldn't wait to get you guys a live episode out. So, Colin, man, again, thank you for joining us. Bro Staff, thank you for listening. We'll see you guys later.